I used to hate the way silence filled our house. It wasn't the kind of silence that makes you feel calm, like after a storm or deep in the woods. It was the silence of something missing, something that should have been there, like laughter, like warmth, like a voice saying, "I love you, kid." But my father's voice was never shaped that way. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't even cold, not in the way most people mean it. He just existed differently. He'd sit at the table with his tools, hunched over the insides of a wristwatch, his fingers steady, his breathing shallow and controlled, as if any sharp movement might make the world spin off axis, and I'd watch him, trying to understand the man who lived in the same house as me, but felt 100 miles away. "Dad, can we play?" I'd ask. He'd blink like I'd startled him out of sleep, then shake his head slowly and say, "Busy now." He was always busy, but not with people, not with me. So I stopped asking, and I started building my own world, brick by brick in the corners of my mind. Books, dinosaurs, space, patterns, things that made sense, things that didn't change or disappear or make me feel like I was failing at being a son. They said I was on the spectrum. They said it like a label, like a warning. But no one ever told me what that meant for love. Love for me was hard to see, harder to feel. People wanted looks and smiles and hugs and thank yous. I wanted space and facts and quiet. I didn't understand why the two couldn't live in the same room. And then there was him, my father, the quietest person I ever met. He didn't say much, never yelled, never praised, just silence, a rhythm of motions, wake, work, fix, eat, sleep, repeat, and that goddamn ticking watch. He wore it like armor, a cheap analog Casio, always ticking, like a metronome marking the beats of his life. Even when we sat in the same room saying nothing to each other, I could hear it, like it was saying something for him, a language I didn't understand yet. I moved out as soon as I could. He didn't stop me, just nodded. "No, I'll miss you. No, take care." Just the ticking. Years passed. I made my own life, studied engineering, fell in love with systems, not people. I lived alone, mostly. Too much noise overwhelmed me. Emotions were like static on a bad radio, distorted, grating, nonsensical. I didn't visit him often. Once a year, maybe less. Each time he looked a little older. Each time he still said nothing, just asked if I wanted tea. Then he'd sit and listen to his tapes. Back then I thought they were music. Jazz, maybe. Something old like him. I never asked. Then he died. I got the call on a Tuesday. He'd collapsed in the workshop. Heart, they said. Quick, no pain. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. Not really. Just an ache I couldn't locate. Like forgetting something important and not knowing what. I went back to the house, my childhood cave. Everything smelled like dust and oil and old wood. I found his tools still laid out, the watch he'd been working on frozen at 4:32, and then I found the box. It was in the closet, beneath an old winter coat, heavy, full of cassette tapes, labeled with dates, some from before I was even born. The first one I picked up was marked March 1997, first laugh. I didn't even know we had a recorder. I found the player on his shelf, next to a half-drunk bottle of scotch and a photo of my mother. I pressed play, static. Then my voice, tiny, high-pitched, laughing uncontrollably. Then his voice, soft, not speaking, just breathing. Then a chuckle, just one, like he'd let something slip. I sat there, stunned, rewound, played it again. The laugh, the breathing, the chuckle. Then I picked up another tape. June 2000. Questions. This time, I was asking about planets. Dad, why is Jupiter so big? Dad, why is Pluto so far? Dad, if I float away, would you catch me? No answers, just the sound of me talking, him breathing. He wasn't recording himself, he was recording me. Dozens of tapes, hundreds maybe. Every milestone, every ramble, every odd little fact I shared. My voice, catalogued, archived, worshipped in magnetic tape. That was his way. That was love. I broke down then. Not in sobs, not in screams, just quietly. A leaking faucet, a fault line that had been waiting years to crack open. He hadn't known how to love with words, but he'd loved me with attention, with presence, with preservation. He'd listened to every sound, every story, every stimming babble I made that others dismissed. He'd seen me. He just hadn't known how to say it, and maybe I hadn't either. I sat there for hours, listening, tape after tape, my childhood unfolding, and under it all, faintly, was always that same sound. Tick, tick, the sound of his watch, steady, constant, a metronome of love. I understood then. Sometimes love doesn't sound like I love you. Sometimes it sounds like breathing, like silence, like a man sitting beside you in the dark, hitting record. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay on the floor of my childhood bedroom, on a carpet still stained from a juice box I spilled when I was 7, surrounded by cassette tapes and the smell of his life. Motor oil, paper, the faint, clean scent of bar soap he used every day. I held one of the tapes like it was a relic. I guess it was. The label read, August 2003, hospital. I didn't remember being sick. Not that year. I didn't remember anything at all. When I pressed play, there was silence at first. Then my voice, muffled, weak, breathing hard. Daddy, it hurts. My own voice, frightened, fragile. Then his, I know, son, soft, steady, I know. I froze. It was the first time on any of the tapes I'd heard him speak directly to me. There was something in his voice, something that cracked under the weight of trying not to break. I knew that feeling. I'd carried it all my life like a mirror of him. The tape ended suddenly, like the batteries died, like the moment was too much for even the machine to hold. I rewound it and played it again. I know, son, the quiet echo of a man trying, and that changed everything. For the first time, I wondered if he'd felt as broken as I had, if the silence wasn't a choice, but a consequence, a wall neither of us knew how to climb. I started cataloging the tapes, arranging them by year, by theme. I made a chart. My autistic brain needed order, even in grief, especially in grief. Each one held something sacred. Me, at 4, reciting dinosaur names for 2 straight minutes. Me at 9, crying after losing a spelling bee. Me at 11, whispering about how other kids didn't like me. And always, always, that faint ticking. The watch, his watch. I started listening for it, searching for the rhythm. It became a kind of guide, like breadcrumbs through my own forgotten years. He never said much on the tapes, but he was always there, breathing, turning pages, shifting in his chair. Sometimes I'd hear him laugh under his breath. Sometimes I'd hear him cry. There was a tape labeled May 2008. Argument. I didn't want to hear it. I knew what it was. That day, the day I told him I hated him. I was 15, angry, tired of the silence, tired of feeling invisible. He had come into my room to ask something, maybe about dinner, maybe nothing at all, and I exploded. You don't even care. You never talk to me. You never touch me. You never say anything. You just sit there. You just fix watches and ignore me. I'd screamed. I remembered that. I'd cried. I remembered that too. He hadn't said a word, just turned and left the room. I had assumed he didn't record that. Why would he? Why would anyone keep proof of how unwanted they were? But he did, and when I played it, I realized something I'd never known. After I left the room, after the shouting, after the door slammed, he stayed. He sat down. The tape kept running, and for 6 minutes he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just this low, breathless weeping, the kind of crying people do when they don't know what to do with all that pain. I didn't even know he could cry. I didn't know he had cried. He had kept that moment, not to punish himself, not to punish me. He kept it because it mattered, because it was part of our story. I listened to it 4 times before I could stop shaking. He wasn't the villain I made him into. He was just a man who loved too quietly for me to hear. I spent the rest of the week in the house, surrounded by fragments of the life we'd never lived together properly. His shirts, his notebooks, his clocks, so many clocks, ticking all at once. A choir of time. On Friday I found the journal. It wasn't much, just a spiral notebook, half-used, tucked under a pile of old invoices. The first page said, "For Isaac, my name." I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. His script was clumsy, uneven, like he was afraid of the pen. But the words were unmistakably his. I don't always know how to say what I feel. I've never been good with people. But I've always loved you, Isaac. Since the day you came into the world with that loud cry and those big impossible eyes. I just didn't know how to show it in the ways the world wanted me to. I'm sorry if that hurt you. I never meant to be a stranger. I pressed my face to that page. I didn't cry. I just breathed, like him, like we were sharing silence one last time. When I left the house for the last time, I took the tapes, all of them. I boxed them with care, like a relic, like a sacred archive. And the watch, I wore it. It's too big for my wrist. The strap is cracked. The ticking is loud. But it's him. It's love. And now every time I hear that sound, tick, 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 I remember that love doesn't have to look the way I was told it should. Sometimes it hides in silence, sometimes it waits in memory, and sometimes it lives on magnetic tape, waiting to be heard. I took the box of tapes home with me, but I didn't unpack them right away. They sat in the corner of my apartment for weeks, their cardboard edges softening in the humidity. I couldn't bring myself to open them again. It felt too big, too raw. I tried to return to routine, work, grocery shopping, the safe monotony of spreadsheets and algorithms, but everything was haunted now. The ticking followed me, not literally, not at first, but I'd hear it in my head, like an echo, a phantom limb of memory. Every time I was still, I imagined the sound. Tick, tick, tick. It was like his ghost had embedded itself into my perception of time. I started wearing the watch to bed. I don't know why. Maybe to feel close to him. Maybe to remind myself he was real, that we were real. Even if I hadn't seen it then, I started dreaming in cassette, hiss, strange, flickering dreams. Fragments of childhood I thought were lost. The time I ran into the wall chasing a paper airplane. The night I stayed up counting constellations out loud. The way he'd sometimes sit in the hallway, outside my bedroom, when I couldn't sleep. He never came in, but he sat there, and I knew. I'd forgotten that, until the dreams brought it back. The next Saturday, I cleared the desk and brought out the tapes. I bought a new player, digital. It could convert analog to MP3. I didn't want the sounds to vanish with time or damage. I wanted them archived, preserved, immortal. I started digitizing them, one by one. It was slow, painful, beautiful. Each tape had a title, some funny, some clinical. First Steps, Broken Window, Isaac's Robot Song, The Day It Rained Inside. And then I found the blue tape. No label, no date, just a single word written in thick black marker. Us. My hands shook as I loaded it into the player. It began with silence, long, stretching silence. Then his voice, not directed at me, not at anyone. A journal entry, an audio confession. I don't know if he'll ever understand me, he said. I don't know if I even understand myself. I couldn't breathe, but I see him. God, I see him. The way he lines up his toys. The way he talks about Saturn like it's his neighbor. The way he flaps his hands when he's excited, like he's trying to fly. There was a pause, a long one. I thought the tape had ended. Then, I wish I knew how to tell him that I think he's perfect. Another silence, a sigh. People say he's broken, that he should be different, that he needs to learn to be normal. Static fuzzed at the edges, but if I could be anyone in this world, I'd want to be more like him. The tape clicked softly, ended. I sat there with my fingers pressed against the pause button, as if it were a heartbeat. I'd never heard him say so much, not even close. All these years, I thought he had nothing to say. But he had volumes. He just recorded them in a language I didn't speak until now. For weeks, I listened every night. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed. Once I woke up with the watch ticking against my chest, and a dream still hanging in my mind, a dream where he was young and smiling, and we were walking through a forest of clocks, ticking trees, chiming flowers. He was explaining how time worked. I didn't understand, but I loved listening. Eventually I started building something, not a machine, not a program, a soundscape. I used the digitized tapes, cut them into pieces, stitched them together with music and silence and static. A collage of memory, a conversation with someone no longer here. I called it The Sound of His Watch. I uploaded it anonymously. Within a week, strangers were reaching out. Messages, emails. My dad never said I love you either. My son is non-verbal, and this gave me hope. I never knew silence could mean so much. I read every message like a prayer. Grief is a strange language, but somehow in his absence, he helped me speak. And one night, as I was adjusting the final levels of a track, I caught something I hadn't noticed before. In the background of the very first tape, the one labeled First Laugh, after the giggling and the breathing and the quiet joy, there was a whisper, barely audible. I boosted the gain, cleaned the noise. It was his voice, saying, "I love you, Isaac." So soft it was almost a dream, but it was there, and I knew he'd always said it. I just hadn't known how to listen. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought hearing those words, "I love you, Isaac," would close the loop, that it would be the crescendo of our story. But real love stories don't end on climaxes. They bleed into everything. After I published the soundscape, I started getting requests. People wanted to know more. Some asked if I had more recordings. Others just wanted to tell me their own stories. A woman in Ohio whose autistic daughter hadn't spoken until she was 7. A man in Sweden who lost his father before he could say goodbye. Each message became another thread in a tapestry I didn't know I was weaving. I started to reply, carefully, slowly. My words still didn't come easily, not when it came to feelings, but something about those messages cracked me open in ways therapy never could. And in the middle of that soft unraveling, I got one message that changed everything. It was from a woman named Ruth. Subject line, "I knew your father." I opened it expecting a scam, or maybe a cruel joke, but it wasn't. Ruth was a former speech pathologist. She worked at the clinic where I'd been evaluated at age 6. She recognized my name and my father's. She said she remembered him vividly. "He came to every appointment," she wrote. "Never said much, but he always had that recorder. He asked more questions than any other parent. Wanted to understand you, not fix you. Understand." I didn't know what to do with that. I stared at the screen for hours, reading the message over and over, my heart a metronome hammering out confusion and awe. He never told me that. He never told me he went. He never told me he asked. He never told me how much he wanted to understand, and it made sense, in this aching circular way, because I used to think my autism built a wall between us, but maybe it built a mirror. Maybe he saw himself in me and didn't know how to say it. I asked Ruth for records. She sent what she could, notes, scans, a progress sheet with clumsy, tight handwriting in the margins. His handwriting. He responds to tone more than content, he wrote. I think he needs more quiet time after noise. I do too. Sometimes I don't know how to reach him, but I keep trying. I printed the notes, pinned them above my desk. Every sentence a lifeline, every scribble a kind of apology. Weeks passed. I kept digitizing. I made more soundscapes. I started speaking at community centers. Parents would cry. Kids would stare at me like I was some puzzle they didn't have to solve. Just witness. One night, after a talk in Minneapolis, a teenage boy came up to me. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, rocking gently. I waited. No pressure, just space. Then he pointed to my wrist. Tick, he said. I nodded. It sounds like love, he said. I didn't cry then, but later, alone in my hotel room, I sobbed into a pillow like a dam had cracked open, because that boy had understood something most people never would. My father's love didn't have volume. It had rhythm. It had texture. It had time. It had tick. That night, I recorded a new entry. Just me, talking into the mic, talking to him. I used to think you didn't love me, but I was wrong, I said. You loved me in reels, in pauses, in the way you showed up and stayed, even when you didn't know how to say why. A long silence followed, and then I let the watch tick. Just that. 3 minutes of ticking. I uploaded it. People said it was the most honest thing I'd ever made. And in that ticking, I found a new kind of language, one that didn't need decoding, one that just was. I started a project, a digital library, a collection of love stories told in ambient sound. No narration, no exposition, just moments. A mother humming in the kitchen, a father typing late at night, a child spinning in circles to the rhythm of a ceiling fan. I called it the archive of unspoken things because I'd learned something most people never do. Love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it listens, sometimes it records, sometimes it ticks quietly beside you, every second a tiny act of devotion. And sometimes if you listen closely enough, you'll hear it say everything. I started hearing from my mother again. It had been years, decades really. After she left, she vanished into silence, a mirror to his. Letters unanswered, birthdays forgotten, postcards that stopped arriving sometime after I turned 12. I never asked him about her. He never offered. But a month after the archive launched, I received an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside, a letter in loopy, unmistakable handwriting. Isaac, I've been listening. I'm sorry I left, but I knew he would stay, and I was right. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. She had heard the tapes, heard my voice, heard his. She said she cried listening to the one where I asked him about the stars. Said she used to sit outside my window after the divorce and listen to me name constellations in the dark. I didn't know that. I didn't know she ever came back. She asked if she could visit. I waited a week to answer. Then I said yes. When she arrived, she looked smaller than I remembered. Softer, somehow. As if life had sanded her down. She brought an old photo album. I had forgotten her smile. It looked like mine, or maybe mine looked like hers. We sat at the kitchen table, flipping pages while the watch ticked on my wrist between us. At one point, she touched it, just her fingertips, featherlight. He wore it every day, she whispered. I know, I said. He used to press it to my stomach when I was pregnant. Said he wanted you to hear something steady, something safe. I didn't know what to say to that, because that was the first time I realized I had known his love even before I was born. The next day, I showed her the archive. We listened to the blue tape together, the one marked Us. She wept, and then she said something that split me open in a way nothing else had. You're more like him than you know. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I was different, that I was louder, that I could say the things he never said, but I didn't. Because she was right. We both lived in details, in patience, in the spaces between words, and I realized maybe the real gift he gave me wasn't just the recordings or the presence or the quiet. Maybe it was the understanding that love can be built in the dark, layered, etched into the background. I started recording again. Not soundscapes, not for the archive, just moments, my own life, the way my tea kettle squealed in the morning, the way the city sounded at 2 a.m., the way my breath caught when I saw my mother smile. I began to imagine a child of my own one day, not because I felt ready, but because I wanted to pass this on, not in lectures or advice, but in presence, in memory, in sound. Sometimes I'd sit in my apartment, eyes closed, letting the tick of the watch fill the space, and I'd wonder if I ever had a child like me, quiet, unsure, strange in all the most beautiful ways, would I know how to love them right? And the answer, quietly, always came back, yes, because I'd been taught by a man who never raised his voice, who never stopped recording, who built his love in reels and hisses and clocks. Part 5 ends with me in my living room, tape recorder in hand, speaking into the silence, not for an audience, not for a project, just this. If you ever wonder who I was or how I felt about you, listen, not to my words, but to everything else. I clicked record, tick, tick, tick. The first time I played the ticking for someone else in person, they cried. It wasn't at a performance or a workshop. It was just a friend, Danielle, from work, visiting after her dad's funeral. She saw the cassette player on the shelf, the tape stacked like sacred stones. "What's that?" she asked. "Memories," I said. "My dad's voice, my childhood." She asked if she could hear one. I hesitated. It had always felt too personal, like reading a diary aloud. But she looked so tired, like she needed something, anything, that made loss make sense. So I chose one at random. October 1999, rainy Tuesday. The sound was soft. Me, humming to myself, building a Lego tower. Rain tapping the windows, his breathing steady in the background. At one point he cleared his throat, and then I asked, so innocently, "Do you think rain makes the sky cry?" A long pause, then his whisper, "Maybe. But maybe it's just the sky remembering something." Danielle covered her mouth and turned away. I thought I'd upset her, but then she said, it's so gentle, gentle. That word stayed with me, because it was never one I'd used for him. But it was true. His love was a gentleness few people ever saw, because gentleness without words is often mistaken for absence. After that, I started opening the tapes to others, slowly, selectively, one-on-one sessions, grief counselors, parents, adult children who never got closure. I wasn't a therapist, but somehow these sounds held healing, not because they explained anything, but because they let silence feel like presence. I started calling the sessions quiet hours. The room would be dark, except for a single lamp. People could sit, lie down, hold something soft. I'd play a few tapes, sometimes mine, sometimes donated by others, and then we'd just sit, no questions, no analysis, just time, just ticking, just the sound of someone loving someone else in the quietest way possible. One night an older man named Clarence stayed after everyone else had gone. He was quiet throughout the session, but at the end he said, "I think I finally forgave my father tonight." I asked why. He didn't answer with a story, he just mimicked the sound of ticking with his tongue. That was enough. There was a purity to all of it I didn't want to lose, so I started documenting it. Not for profit, not for fame, just to remember, and that's when I realized I'd become the recorder. My father used magnetic tape, I used digital, but the heart was the same. We were both archivists of tenderness. My apartment changed. Blank walls gave way to corkboards covered in dates and names and quotes. He made sandwiches every day at 5. She hummed the same lullaby for 30 years. He tapped the side of the couch when he was proud. Tiny details, insignificant to anyone else, proof of love to the right listener. I bought a second watch, just like his, same model, same ticking. I gave it to a boy who reminded me of myself. His name was Caleb, 8 years old, non-verbal. His parents brought him to quiet hours after hearing about the project. He sat cross-legged on the floor, hands on his ears, at first overwhelmed, but when I put the watch next to him and let it tick, he reached out, held it, pressed it to his chest, tick, 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 his eyes closed, and he smiled. His mother cried into her sleeve. She whispered, "It's the first time he smiled in a month." That night, I added a new tape to the archive, not of my father, not of me, but of Caleb, breathing, smiling, holding the watch like it was a lighthouse. We'd become a chorus of the unheard, a choir made of pauses, of gestures, of watch ticks and whispering tapes. And I realized, my father didn't just give me his love, he gave me a language, a way to show up, a way to record, a way to teach others that sometimes the loudest love is the one that never interrupts. It was around this time I got invited to speak at a university, not as an academic, not as a professional, just a storyteller. They were hosting a symposium on alternative expressions of love, non-traditional families, neurodivergent bonds, unspoken connection. Somehow, my name ended up on their list. I hesitated before agreeing. I wasn't sure how to talk about something so private in front of strangers, but something in me said yes. Maybe it was his voice, maybe it was the ticking. When I walked into the lecture hall, I carried the tape box like a sacred object. Some part of me expected people to laugh or roll their eyes, but they didn't. They listened. The room was quiet, respectful, curious. I didn't give a speech. I played sounds. I started with Caleb's breathing, then my own laugh from age 5, then my father's sigh, layered over a distant metronome beat. The room shifted with each sound, hearts tuning to a strange invisible frequency, and then I asked, "When did you last record a moment not meant for anyone but yourself?" No one answered aloud. They didn't need to. Something cracked open that day, not just in them, in me. For so long I thought being seen required being loud, but I had learned something else entirely. Being seen can mean being held. Being heard can mean being remembered. After the talk, a student approached. They were maybe 19, with wide, unsure eyes. They said they were autistic too, said they'd spent years thinking their love wasn't real because it didn't look like other people's. I handed them a small recorder. "Start now," I said. "Start what?" "Start remembering yourself." They clutched it like it was a gift, like it was a lifeline, and I realized I'd become what my father was to me, a witness, a keeper. That night, back home, I listened to one of the oldest tapes, April 1995, first sounds. Just static at first, then soft coos, my baby self not speaking but being, and beneath it his voice. "You're here, that's enough." Those 4 words, not profound, not poetic, but they cracked my chest wide open. "You're here, that's enough." I had spent so much of my life trying to earn something that was already mine. Love, presence, the right to take up space. He had given that to me, without fanfare, without demand, just by pressing record. The next day, I started building a museum exhibit, a traveling installation called the Quiet Archive. It would feature sound domes, small private spaces where visitors could sit, close their eyes, and listen to strangers' breath, rain, wind, typing, tick, and somewhere in the center of it all, under glass, his watch, still ticking, still telling time, not in minutes but in moments, still saying, "I was here, and I loved you," still waiting for someone to press their ear to the silence and hear everything they ever needed to know. The first sound in the museum was always the watch. We calibrated the exhibit carefully, so even before visitors stepped fully inside, they could hear it, soft, persistent, steady, like a heartbeat buried beneath layers of memory, like something waiting to be understood. Opening day arrived, and I watched from the edge of the gallery, palms sweating, heart racing. What if no one came? What if no one heard it? But they did. They came in pairs, in families, in quiet solitude. They moved slowly through the domes, sitting, listening, crying, and they stayed. Not for minutes, sometimes hours, as if they'd entered a place that allowed grief and love to sit down together. One woman returned 3 days in a row. She always brought her father's pocket watch, holding it in her lap while listening. The 3rd day, she told me, "I never thought silence could be a balm." Another man sat under the dome titled Kitchen Sounds, 1998, and whispered, "I'd forgotten what my mother's cooking sounded like." One afternoon, a school brought a group of autistic teenagers. I expected restlessness, distraction. Instead, something magical happened. They settled. They understood. One girl, her name was Ruby, walked straight up to the central display, stared through the glass at the watch, and didn't move for 10 minutes. Her teacher tried to lead her away. She shook her head. Then she said, clear and certain, "It talks without talking." I wrote that down. We made a new plaque for the exhibit. Right below the watch, etched in small brass letters, "It talks without talking." Ruby, age 13. And then something strange happened. People started bringing their own recordings, old cassettes, voicemails, VHS tapes, USB drives. They wanted their memories to be heard, to live somewhere safe. I created a second section of the museum, the listening room. It was a small enclosed space with comfortable chairs, headphones, soft light. Visitors could browse a catalog and listen, not to stories but to presence. A father tying shoes, a child naming bugs, a woman giggling while folding laundry. Nothing remarkable, nothing loud, but somehow it all echoed with love. I added one of my own. It was a 10-minute clip of me, years ago, brushing my teeth while my father sat nearby, adjusting a watch. No words exchanged, but the ticking, always the ticking, and under that, his hum, barely audible, a lullaby he used to hum before my mother left. I had forgotten it, but there it was, buried beneath the mundane, waiting. I closed my eyes and listened like I was back in that house, back in that quiet, back in the presence of someone who couldn't say I love you, but spent every moment proving it. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't until now. He hadn't just recorded me because he didn't know how to speak. He recorded me because he was afraid to lose me, afraid that if he couldn't explain me, the world would erase me, afraid that if he didn't keep evidence of my joy, my curiosity, my stimming and questions and rambling facts, then no one would believe they were beautiful. But I see it now. Every second he taped was a kind of resistance, a way of saying, you matter, you are worth remembering, you belong here. And now, through the quiet archive, he says that not just to me but to everyone, to Ruby, to Danielle, to Caleb, to Clarence, to the hundreds of people who walk into the museum and hear something inside themselves for the first time, and to my future child, who may one day stand in this very room listening, not to my voice, but to a language I inherited, a language of rhythm, of gentleness, of time, of love. Tick, tick, tick. The museum had been open for nearly a year when I received the box. It was unmarked, delivered by hand, no return address, just a small cardboard cube tied with twine and resting quietly on my office chair. Inside, there were 3 items, a cassette tape labeled March 1980 before, a note, this was his before you, I think you're ready now, and a photograph of my father, young, barely older than I was now, sitting at a bench surrounded by gears and wires, sleeves rolled up, eyes squinting in the sun. He was smiling. It startled me, not because he wasn't allowed joy, but because it was so open, so visible, so different from the quiet man I grew up with. This was a boy in love with the world, before life taught him to lower his volume. I turned the tape over in my hand. My fingers trembled. I hadn't known he recorded before me. I hadn't known he existed in sound before I gave him a reason to. I waited until the museum was closed to listen. It opened with music, a soft warbling melody, maybe recorded from a radio. Then footsteps, a door, and his voice, laughing. I don't know why I'm doing this, he said. The voice was lighter, faster, less measured. But maybe someday I'll want to remember what it was like to feel everything so loud. I held my breath. I'm building something, he continued. A timekeeper, not just a watch, something more, a device that counts what really matters. He paused. Not seconds, not minutes. Then, softly, moments. I felt my chest collapse. He'd been chasing this idea, the sound of his watch, long before I knew it had a name. He was trying to build a memory machine, a love machine, something that could hold time without breaking it. The recording went on. He talked about his father, my grandfather, who never hugged him, who left early and didn't come back. About the way grief made him quiet, about how he'd promised, even then at 22, that he'd try to be different. I don't know how to say things, he said, but I think if I can record the right sounds, maybe someone will hear me someday. It ended with the sound of a ticking prototype, not his later watch, a cruder version, but the rhythm was already there, steady, honest, devoted. I didn't cry right away. I sat in the quiet of the listening room, surrounded by 1,000 borrowed memories, and realized I hadn't just inherited a story, I'd inherited a mission, to record, to remember, to resist forgetting. In the months that followed, I made a new section of the museum, the Origin booth. Visitors could sit inside a replica of his first workspace, hear his early tape, see his sketches, learn the roots of a man who'd once been a boy trying to build permanence out of impermanence. And at the center of it all, that tape, the one labeled before, not a relic, but a beginning. I played it for my mother when she returned again, on the anniversary of his death. She listened in silence, one hand over her mouth. When it ended, she said, "He never showed me that part of him. He didn't know how," I said, "but he showed you." I nodded, because maybe that was always the point. Some fathers teach by presence, others by absence, mine taught by recording, and now I teach by playing it back. I kept the watch ticking. Years passed. The museum grew. We opened branches, small ones, in cities where silence was often mistaken for absence. People donated sounds from around the world, a grandfather's last song, the echo of bare feet on linoleum, a son saying goodbye in sign language, captured only by the hush of a waving hand. We stopped calling it a museum. We called it a sanctuary, because people weren't just remembering, they were healing, they were listening, and through it all, the sound of my father's watch remained at the center, a single, looping rhythm that ran through every exhibit, every listening room, every archive entry. Tick, tick, tick. I never replaced the battery. Somehow it never stopped, and maybe that was the most magical part. This ordinary thing, bought in a department store decades ago, had become the heartbeat of something global. But even sanctuaries must evolve. One morning, I stood before the central installation, the original watch under glass, and realized it was time to let it rest. Not end, not erase, just change. So we made a final tape, a farewell, not to the project, not to the sound, but to the silence between us, the distance between a father and a son that had once felt infinite. I recorded it in the origin booth, just my voice. "Dad," I began, "if you can hear this, thank you." I paused, let the room fill with memory. "I used to think you didn't love me, but now I know you were always speaking. I just didn't yet have the ears for it." Another pause. "Then, you gave me time. You gave me space. You gave me the right to be exactly who I was. And you captured it, piece by piece, so that I'd never forget." I let the tape run a little longer, then I set the recorder beside the glass, where the watch lay ticking, and walked away. Not out of grief, but because I no longer needed to carry him in fragments. He was everywhere now. In the sound of rain, in the hush before a child speaks, in the hum of someone brushing their teeth while a parent listens nearby, in the breath someone takes when they finally say the thing they were always afraid to say, and in that steady, unyielding rhythm, tick, tick, tick. He didn't teach me how to say I love you, he taught me how to show it, and now I show it to others, with recorders, with reverence, with silence, and with sound. So this is the last entry in the sound of his watch, not an ending, a release, a letting go of the real, knowing the story keeps playing, because the truth is, some love doesn't fade. It echoes, it endures, it ticks, forever.